nonprofit radio coverage of 16 NTC, the Nonprofit Technology Conference. We're in San Jose, California at the Convention Center. My guests now are Misty McLaughlin and Michelle Egan. Misty is responsible for organizational development at Jackson River LLC, and Michelle is Deputy Director for Marketing and Engagement at the Natural Resources Defense Council. Ladies, welcome.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Pleasure to have you. Before we get to your workshop topic, I have to shout out the NTC swag item for this interview, which is from Every Action. We've got Build the World You Want notebook and postcards. Build the World You Want from Every Action. And one of the postcards defines what a do-gooder is, a dreamer and a doer. So we're going to add this to the NTC swag pile, which is very well organized. Just throw it on there. There, see how well organized that is? Beautiful. All right. Okay. Your seminar, your workshop, your program is all about the modern digital team, how to build a digital program that works. Michelle, what are organizations sometimes not getting quite right about their internal digital team?
Well, I think for us, we were really struggling with how to integrate digital into the strategies. We were a very print-centric organization, actually, and making that transition to a digital organization wasn't natural for us.
And when did that sort of start?
I joined NRDC 2 years ago. I think it's been in the works for a while, ever since people have been talking about digital, but it just wasn't getting traction until we had significant leadership support to do it. So that was about 2 years ago.
We'll talk about the importance of leadership.
Yes.
This all has to trickle down from the top.
Well, it's helpful when they are supporting change
Yes. Okay.
to happen.
Okay. Misty, welcome back to
Thank you.
To Nonprofit Radio.
Thank you.
What would you like to add to sort of our overview? Why did we need this session?
Well, NRDC is an interesting example. They were sort of a case study that we looked at in detail with Michelle. They're interesting because they're a giant organization with a pretty large budget, but they still have the same kinds of challenges in terms of integrating digital, even in 2016, even after the web has been around and maturing for the last 20 years. They were having some of the same challenges we see with organizations of all shapes and sizes doing all kinds of work.
Okay.
That it's really hard to transition from a kind of print-heavy direct mail program into the new digital era and to adapt to all of the channels and all of the changes that come so fast in the way that we work now.
All right, and the conversation we're going to have about having this high efficiency digital team applies regardless of how many people are on your team. So
Absolutely.
if it's just 2 people or if it's 40 or 50, it still applies, yes?
Yes.
Okay, excellent, because we got small and mid-sized shops listening, and some may have very large teams, but most probably have pretty small digital teams.
Yes.
And they may have other responsibilities too, right? Marketing, communications.
Yes.
Including the print work, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Where should we start, Misty? Where should we start with this?
Well, I think the frame for our session is an interesting one. Of course I say that, but because I think that for a long time, especially at conferences like NTC, we were talking about best practices. We've been talking about channels and tactics and tools that when you talk about digital, it's been a lot of like, what should I do on social media? Or what are the top 10 things that my website needs to do? And with this session, we sort of said, there's lots of ways to get strategy. What we really need to be talking about now is a methodology for how you adapt to the changing times. Things are not going to stop changing at this rate. You're not going to stop being asked to be responsive, to be integrated across all your channels, to have consistent messaging. In fact, you're going to be pushed to do that more and more. So we talked about a digital first approach to how you do communications, not just your web channels or your social media channels, but all of your communications in an organization, really radically changing the way that you do work to be digital first.
Okay, native digital. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's about ways of planning, ways of thinking about what your audience needs, ways of doing listening so you're responsive to what you're actually hearing from your supporters that they want, and you're kind of taking your messages to them in the places that they are.
That they are versus where you want them to be.
Exactly.
Okay. So there's a lot to break this down. How do we know what channels will be best for our constituency? Now, I know that obviously it varies from organization, but how do we assess where is it a listening campaign we need to start with? And how do we figure out where we should be putting our focus, because that's where the people we want to talk to are?
That's a great question. So one of the things we really focused on in this session was about becoming a measurement and data-driven organization. Do you hear a lot about that?
Let's talk a lot about that. All right, so how do we become one? How do we?
Well, one of the things that digital gives you is a lot of tools for seeing what's working and what's not working in the channels that you're already in. We talked a ton about sprawl. So Michelle, maybe you want to comment on when you got to NRDC, how many digital properties were you dealing with?
Quite a few. Like, I think we had collectively over 100, like 36 different microsites, 60 different NRDC Twitter handles. So I think the first step that we were talking about is really taking an inventory of what's happening, because I think oftentimes with lack of a focus strategy, more is better is what often prevails. And so starting with taking an audit to see how many do you actually have seems to be a good first step to getting digital first and making sure that what you're doing has perfect purpose and can be measured.
Okay, how many do you have? All right, but that doesn't take too long. But then how do we start to...
It depends who you are.
Were there some out there you didn't even know about?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it's still emerging. It's like an amazing archaeology dig for how many properties we have, because it's an organization that has a lot of funding and lots of passionate people who want to get the message out there. And you can start a blog or start a microsite and capture that work.
Okay, and then all of a sudden NRDC's name is on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly. But the person who did it leaves, and it's still out there, and no one's maintaining it.
Then how do you manage this inventory, curate your inventory of what you've got? How do you decide what's most important, what's less important, and what shouldn't even be done anymore? How do you make those decisions?
Well, I can talk about specifically what we did at NRDC. And so what we ended up doing is we collected all of the sites and we focused down to really just the sites that talked about our issues directly and shut down all the other sites that were random sites that were being run by other people.
It's got to be mission related.
Right.
Closely mission related.
Right.
So that's the place to start. Well, that's what I mean, maybe not start, but at this step of the process, how closely related is it?
Yeah, that was the first. So the two was, is it mission related, and how much traffic, how many people are coming to it? And then we looked at that and developed a strategy for how to merge it together and get more focused.
Okay. Misty, anything you want to add there?
Well, one of the things that I think kept coming up in having this conversation is that there are all these kind of moments in the life cycle of an organization that you can do this. So if you're rolling out a new website, it's a great time to inventory everything and go from this kind of sprawl approach to your digital ecosystem to something that's more like planned growth, where you're rolling things in, you're consolidating, you take that opportunity to really do it right and to pull in so that you can really align what you're going to be doing in an ongoing basis with the actual staff and resources and budget that you have to do a few things really well.
Okay. Well, are there other opportune moments besides website revision?
There are many. So getting new leadership in the organization is a great one. In NRDC's case, it was driven by a rebrand, although as Michelle said, there are probably better moments. A website is a better moment to do that because you can really get into the meat of the issues of the organization and assess what's really aligned with where we're going. Rolling out a strategic plan. Sometimes it doesn't even have to be something so giant, like you might have a security attack that makes you realize you have all of these websites out there that aren't being properly maintained and secured. Someone said an AdWords campaign, something that worked out really well, or a terrible fundraising year. Any of those things can be catalysts for having the conversation about how to pull back on what you're doing and really see what's working.
Okay.
Another thing that came up in the session today was even a news moment. So if your issue is particularly highlighted in the news, that's a great time to look and assess about how you can do more with that.
Although right in the instant, you want to be reacting. You want to be seizing that moment. But right after that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. After you capitalize on the headlines.
Right.
Okay. All right, so those are some opportunities. Where do we go after we found opportunities? Now what? Help me along here. This is a big process.
Yep. So there are a lot of things that you want to do over a period of time. One of the things that I think is really useful, the Communicopia team a couple of years ago did a really thorough study of nonprofits and nonprofit digital models across the spectrum. So large organizations, small organizations, people in a lot of different sectors. And they came up with these 4 models of digital governance. I won't go into all of them, but they're basically ways that digital programs are structured inside of an organization to keep this sprawl from happening. And there are some models that lead to everyone just going off and doing their own thing, and you get a very fragmented brand presence. Whereas there are other models that we're kind of seeing in this digital first world really work well to have some centralized governance and to allow digital to kind of drive a communication strategy, but where you capitalize on the talent and the ideas of people across the organization to contribute to having a really rich digital presence. Right. And that's what NRDC is trying to implement right now.
That was at Communicopia?
Communicopia, yep. It's a digital teams report. You can actually see it at digitalteams.org. It's a great set of resources.
Okay, excellent, valuable. Let me ask you, Michelle, about maybe having to drag some people along who are not accustomed to being digital natives and having communications be that way. How do we get buy-in from the reluctant members of our team?
We have had to have a lot of conversations and education, just talking about, how it's different, why it's valuable, how it's going to help their work, how, in a digital world, just writing something and hitting publish is only the first step. Then you have to figure out how you're promoting it, how you're getting it out to different audiences and building that engagement loop and where you're sending people. So it's we found through conversations has been the way that we can make the most progress and bringing people along.
Now, I imagine having leadership buy-in is valuable, right? I mean, if the leaders are involved and engaged, then it's going to be a lot easier to bring your team members along?
Yeah, I think the leadership is very valuable in helping to instigate it and to help make it happen. But I think that the buy-in really comes from the people that you're working with and doing the work. So the leadership provides the permission to have the conversations, but then really working with the people in our organization to help them understand is the thing that's actually making the change.
Okay. Misty, let's follow on something that Michelle just mentioned. What are some of the advantages of doing it this way? Why should we be thinking digital first?
That's a great question.
Oh, cool. I'm glad I got one out.
You got
13 minutes. Okay.
Excellent question.
Doing great.
So there are a lot of advantages. I think that the truth is that digital staff right now at all different kinds of organizations, they are burnt out. Nonprofit people are burnt out. Digital staff are being asked to respond 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in an environment that is always on. And they're almost all doing it. Even at very big organizations, even for NRDC, they're understaffed. They don't have the people that they need to be able to operate in as many channels, to learn new channels, to be responsive to what they're hearing, to do the measurement, and then to try to go throughout the organization and educate all of the people who really need to be learning from what's happening online. So operating in a digital-first way kind of gives you a framework for prioritizing, for making decisions, for aligning resources and capacity with the actual budget that you have, and for stopping doing some things, which I think is sometimes the biggest challenge, that there's so much opportunity. It's really hard to say no. And as internal stakeholders at organizations get smarter, they want more from the digital presence. They want to see themselves able to be reflected and their work able to be reflected in all of these different places. But there's not always the ROI on that, particularly for small budgets. So this gives you a way of kind of going and saying, what should we be doing? How do we invest right in our communications capacity, period?
Okay. And of course, if we're talking about digital first, doesn't mean digital only.
Right.
So we're not abandoning our traditional channels.
That's exactly right. No, we're acknowledging that all of those channels work together, and they have to work together. Whereas if you kind of stick with the old way of communicating, something that's really offline first and digital as an afterthought, you're never going to align those messages across channels because the channels are so different. Whereas digital gives you the ability to really learn as you're going along and then to inform all of your communications by doing that planning in concert together.
Okay. Michelle, you're doing a lot of nodding. You want to add to Anything Misty was saying?
Yeah, I just that I agree. And I think because the digital is such a different way of consuming information, that if you're not approaching that first in your thought process for how you're getting those messages out, then you're really losing on an opportunity.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have measures, Misty? You brought up, ROI and sometimes how difficult that can be. You mentioned for small organizations, but even small or not, how do we start to, a year later, prove to our teams and our leadership that this transition to digital first has been worth it?
Well, I think NRDC is a great case study in this area. Do you want to mention some of the? I'll set you up if you want. Okay. So Michelle,
I love how you work together. This is great. What a great team! Like, just take this on the road.
Yeah. We are.
That's why we're here.
Would you like me to set you up? Oh, I'd love that. Would you set me up? Oh, here's your setup.
Okay, knock it out of the park. I'll pitch.
Right.
So Michelle, I'm going to toot Michelle's horn because she doesn't toot her own horn nearly enough. So she's just gone through a very rigorous 2-year process, which is still very much underway, of kind of going top to bottom to align all of the components of the communications program. So starting with a rebrand, then working through a website redesign that was really used to focus in on the issues and to look at all of that digital sprawl and rein it into a cohesive set of properties, then to look at the social strategy and to kind of make sure that their organizational structure, all of their processes, in fact, like all of the relationships inside of the organization were sort of set up to be able to support the strategy that they were trying to achieve. So we talked about a couple of case studies. One is the website that's rolling out and some of the early gains that you've seen, but also some of the social gains that you've seen in the last year, just organizing around this model for talking about the work that NRDC does.
Yeah, so I would say specific to your question with the metrics, so we really, just with the content component alone, starting to deliver a consistent stream of content that looked at a narrative arc to make sure that we weren't just, act on this, act on this, act on this, but creating a story. Over a year, we grew every social channel and we increased our likes and shares by over 800%. Just within Facebook.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, so huge. Just by, again, and no advertising dollars spent, just really looking at how we were playing our content mix.
Now, aside from the likes, I'm particularly interested in the engagement, the real engagement metrics, not just likes.
Yep.
What else should we be looking at? Real engagement.
Yeah.
How do we measure that?
That's a great question. I feel like that's the next step for you guys.
Oh.
Yeah, no, okay, I'm going to stop saying your questions are great. They're all great, Tony. Everyone.
I love it. I have to take it whenever I get it. So it doesn't come often. You're being particularly generous. No, okay. Real metrics, not vanity metrics.
Yeah.
What should we be looking at?
Well, I think that a year ago you were looking at vanity metrics, right? It was like all we could really measure was reach. So it was, are people even seeing this stuff in the first place? Now, I feel like you're kind of in the process of moving towards metrics that are about what are people doing with what they see, and that the next frontier, in my opinion, is and how does what they're doing lead to long-term stepped engagement over a period of time, particularly in the fundraising and advocacy space. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree.
When you say long-term stepped engagement, what do you mean?
So people moving from a growing awareness of the issues, which education and awareness is actually one of the major components of what NRDC is trying to do. They're trying to build environmental awareness across a number of issues. So likes and shares are really important for them. That's kind of as much as you're going to get in the way of measuring issue awareness. But then there's how awareness translates into activism and to donations and to engagement with a particular set of issues. Do you want to say anything more about that?
Yeah, no, it's something that we need to develop, because I think part of the challenge for us is that we were doing all of these things in very isolated ways. And so our membership digital presence was really, it was the fundraising and it was growing members, but that was different than advocacy for sending out action alerts to sign a petition on something. So we're bringing those together, and I think those softer metrics we're seeing a trend. The hypotheses that since those are going up, we're getting more petitions signed, we're getting more members, we're increasing our dollars, but we don't have the concrete percentages yet, the true engagement metrics to prove it out. So that's our next step.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Do you want to say something more, Misty? Okay. We still have a few more minutes together. What have we not talked about around building this high-performing digital team? Come on. You had a whole session on this.
Oh, we have hours of content on this.
Let's not get carried away, but a couple minutes.
All right. So I think one of the things that we spent a lot of time on, and actually we did a survey in preparation for this session. You can see some of the survey results and also some of the Q&A that we did. We took questions and we answered them in a narrative format. You can look at jacksonriver.com. We'll post that there after the conference. But people wanted to talk about hiring and recruiting digital staff. And so what we put out there, what we posited in the session is that, you need to think about getting those digital capabilities that you need from a mix of in-house and vendors and contractors, freelancers, and that everybody needs a pretty wide variety of skills. 20 years ago, people needed a webmaster, and you were trying to make a website. It didn't even have to be a good website. We are not there anymore. You actually need a ton of different roles. You need campaign strategy. You need front-end development. You need back-end development, project management, typically a digital director of some sort in the organization, someone playing that role. You need user experience. You need SEO expertise. I could go on and on and on. Social management. A lot of the time, organizations are still doing that with one person, but that is an impossible expectation if you do not supplement those generalist skills with specialist skill sets from outside the organization, or you cultivate internal talent that might exist in little pockets in other parts of the organization that can support your program. A one-person team is just really struggling at this point to do it alone.
It's not realistic.
It's not at all realistic. And everyone on the ground knew that. I mean, I think half the people in the audience were digital teams of one. It's still...
One or two.
Yeah,
yes.
one or two, really common. But their bosses don't know that. They don't know that the skills to manage a social property are really different from coding and implementing a website.
So tell your boss to listen to Nonprofit Radio.
Yes.
Because it's too late for them to come to NTC. They missed your session. They can listen to NTC Conversations, or they can listen to this episode of Nonprofit Radio. Bosses, are you listening? For Pete's sake, open your ears, open your eyes.
Invest.
Your 1- and 2-person digital teams are stuffing. They're struggling. They're struggling. Help them. God's sake. All right. I think we're going to leave it there.
Great.
All right? I hate to give myself the last word, but I was only riffing off what you already said. So, okay. Mr. McLaughlin, Michelle Egan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Being on Nonprofit Radio, being back on Nonprofit Radio from Misty's case. Misty is doing organizational development at Jackson River LLC, where you can go for the resource that she was talking about, the research that led up to this session. And Michelle Egan, Deputy Director, Marketing and Engagement at the Natural Resources Defense Council. And this is Tony Martignetti Nonprofit Radio coverage of NTC 16, the Nonprofit Technology Conference. Thank you so much for being with us.